Welcome to Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, Professor of Geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today, we're very fortunate to have my colleague at Long Beach City College, Ray Sumner. Ray, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Mike, to see you again.
Absolutely. Well, I should have said you retired from Long Beach City College, so maybe I should have said Cal State Dominguez Hills, but there we go. Ray, I'm going to ask you to reflect upon your life, your childhood perhaps, and think about what sparked your interest in geography. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I grew up in Townsville in far north Queensland, in the deep north, and although I wouldn't have said it at the time, I know that my life was about geography because it was open air and ocean and freedom and going camping and taking the ferry across the magnetic island and looking at everything and finding out about the environment. And yeah, it was only like, well, when I went to high school, I always wanted to see the outside world. Could go to some nearby towns like Ingham, look at the cane fields, but to go down to the capital of Brisbane was not something you would do. It was 1,000 miles, but I should say, my father was American, and that too made me want to see more of the world, because I had been in America as a very young child, but then the family took me back to Townsville, and that's where I stayed. And if you want to talk about education, I don't really need these glasses on to talk to you. I was always curious. I loved reading and loved learning, and there wasn't much else to do. There was no television, certainly no computers. Once a week when I was a teenager, I was allowed to go and see some ancient cowboy movie bug house. So there was a whole world out there that I was curious about. And so that's, I guess, part of geography, the where part. But not just where, but what people were like and what their houses were like and what their lives were like. So this is a long story. We should be talking about geography. So it was also a place and time where girls didn't go to high school. Many girls did not even go to high school, but my father always encouraged me to go. And even then, they went for 2 years to high school and learned typing and shorthand. And I had no interest whatsoever. So I managed to get a scholarship that would pay for the second 2 years of high school, and they advised us if we were going on, and there were only about half a dozen girls in the classes then in 5th and 6th form. They advised us what subjects to take if you wanted to go to university. I thought that was a dream because the university was down in Brisbane. There was no money in our family, but lo and behold, they opened a little branch of the Queensland University up in Townsville. So I had a different scholarship then to pay for the university, and it was an agreement with the education department that they would pay for my first year at this non-university, this branch of the Queensland University, and then I had to go to Brisbane and spend a year at the Teachers Training College, and then I had to teach for 2 years or else repay the money.
Where did you teach?
Back in town at the high school. It was for high school teachers. There was a shortage at that time. And so I taught German and geography and English and math, I don't know, whatever they asked me, and saved up all my money and went to Europe. The minute my 2 years were up, I went down to Sydney and got on a boat and went to Europe. And that was when I really appreciated it. I still didn't think of myself exactly as a geographer, just as a person curious about anything and everything. And so I was in Europe for a couple of years, travelling around. Lots of Australians then used to take a trip to Europe, but mostly they went to England and had a kind of working holiday, and then they bought an old Volkswagen bus and drove down through India and got back to Australia somehow. I wasn't interested in that part of it. But anyway, I came back and started teaching again and decided to finish my degree because I'd only really done 1 year of university studies. So because by then the university was larger, they put classes on in the afternoon and evening. So people like me who were teachers could go and take these classes. And that's where I met the famous Slim Bauer. He was my geography teacher when I was doing this high school teaching, and he opened the world. All his slides were examples from the United States, and he was a very amusing character, and he took us on some field trips and just up into the forest and things like that. And that's, I guess, when I thought I'd do more geography. It took a long time, though, because I was only taking 1 or 2 classes and teaching full time. But eventually, I have to mention then, a tutor was hired called Brian Finlayson. My whole education is Australian, so you've probably never heard of him. But we had to share this little room together, and we became close friends and still are. And he said for my thesis, I should do something about hill slopes, measuring hill slopes. I fell in love with geomorphology.
Sure.
And landscapes. I still love looking at landscapes. So I wrote my thesis about measuring these hills. I tramped up and down looking out for taipans and dingoes and spiders and things, and measured all these hill slopes. And that was my bachelor's thesis. And then I thought, why not do a master's thesis? Because the other thing was, after Slim had left and moved to the Northern Territory, there was an English professor in charge of geography called John Oliver, and he was very supportive, and he was a climatologist. And I didn't find climatology very exciting, to be honest, at the time, but he got a grant from the Nuffield Foundation, and I was able for my master's thesis to travel around the outback of Central and North Queensland on an entirely different topic, because I was really interested in housing and settlement and the materials of the buildings, and I took these hygrothermographs with me and set them up at various properties, and then left them for 2 weeks and came back and got them and wrote more and more about the old houses, really. And that was a really interesting time of my life, and I felt like a rolling stone, really, since I first left and went to Europe when I was 21. And so that was my master's thesis. So I should, you don't want to hear about my whole life. I lost my interest in geomorphology because they said for that first thesis I had to take a geology course in sedimentology or something, and that meant I had to go out into the bush on a field trip with the geology students, who were all male and hated having a woman along. There was another woman went too. We had to sleep in the homestead house while all the boys were out at the camp, and we'd go out in the morning. They'd expect us to cook and wash up, the whole thing. It was a very sexist kind of society at those times. Women should be in their proper place. Because I had thought I might change over to geology, but when there was this attitude, they didn't want me. I thought, there's other things I can do. Hey, this is a long story.
So then you went to geomorphology and geography, or did you do human geography?
No, I never did human geography, but I'd been in Europe and I knew a lot about, and I read profusely about other countries And so to hurry along, let's leave about my PhD. Well, no, let me tell you. When it came time to do my PhD, I'd already been working for the National Park Service in Victoria. I gave up being at the University of Newcastle. I taught there for a while, but I thought it would be more fun to work for the National, and it was fabulous. It was a wonderful job, doing lots and lots of field work and seeing how these sites could be interpreted for the public and all that kind of thing. And a friend of mine, who's now passed on, said to me, why don't you look at the life of Amalia Dietrich connection? And I got a scholarship from the National Museum in Victoria to research this woman. And I went back to Germany and did all this research for a year and wrote a report. When I got back, I got married and my husband got a job in Queensland. and so when I got to Queensland with him, and I had a son by then also, oh no, he was born as soon as we got to Queensland, another friend said to me, you should turn that report into a PhD thesis. And you could do it without having to pay any fees at that time. They wanted more people. And I looked at the geography department, and there was no one there who could have supervised what I wanted to do. But in history, there was a man called John Moses. So I rolled up to John Moses and said, will you want to be my thesis advisor? And I'd already done a whole lot of work. So here's the great confession. My PhD is actually in the history department.
Well, you're not the only geographer to have a PhD in a different discipline.
I think it was as much geography as history.
Sure.
There wasn't anyone cast aspersions on their work, but it just wouldn't have fitted. So there's the whole story of my education. It was totally in Australia. Anyway, then we were in Queensland and my husband came to America on a special scholarship and I stayed behind because I was teaching at the Queensland University of Technology. And he called me up and he said, you'd better sit down, I've been offered a job at Caltech. And I knew my life had changed forever. How could I possibly say, you can't go when
Sure.
the apex of any engineer?
Indeed, it is.
So we came here.
So you came to California.
And Caltech promised me that they would help me find a job because I had to give up being a lecturer.
Sure.
And not doing very much when now how did this happen? I put my name out somewhere, I think, that I was available to teach geography. Anyway, Bill Bowen, he hired me to teach world geography. He said, could you do it? And I said, of course I could. Although I'd never actually taught a world geography class before, but I knew about languages and cities and all the stuff that's in world geography. So I did that. And then the next semester, I forget, I may have taught there for a couple of semesters, but then Joan Clemens was desperate for someone. So I knew I knew Tom McKnight. I didn't know him personally, but she said, oh, I'm married to Tom McKnight, or I think they may not have been married then anyway. So she hired me to teach down there. So then I taught all the kinds of geography that are taught in a community college here and there, and became really close friends with Joan and Tom. And then Joan persuaded me to join the Society of Women Geographers, and ultimately I became the local head of the Society of Women Geographers, but that branch is closed down now. It's kind of it was hard to keep up.
Sure. And then you went to Long Beach City College after a while.
Yes, and of course both Joan and Tom, Joan and Bill Bowen wrote me love
Sure.
letters, and so then I was at Long Beach City College for 20 years.
Wow. And so after, and during that time at Long Beach City College, you maintained a strong role in the California Geographical Society. I think that's fair to say.
You an editor, why don't you do it? So I did that for 6 years. And it was also Joan who first introduced me to the APCG. It was in Spokane, and
The Association of Pacific Coast Geographers.
she said she couldn't go, but would I go and meet up with these friends? So that was my first, was it? I'm mixing up the dates. Was that before the Northridge quake or after? Because that was.
Boy, I don't know. That was in the 90s,
And so
early 90s, I think. Was it? Or 89, 90, 91, something.
90s, I didn't come.
Yeah,
91.
91. Okay.
So it must have been 91, 92, something like that. So that's my career as a geographer, I suppose, the education of a geographer.
But you know, as far as the California Geographical Society goes, I mean, we've been to many meetings together. I've known you for 20 plus years, and you have always presented something interesting. You were one of the members that continually would make a presentation every time you went, if not every time, almost every time. And I think students and colleagues alike found them to be very, very interesting, very intriguing presentations. Why do you feel that it's important to present at these meetings like the CGS meeting?
Why do I do that? I think it's because I'm eternally curious and I find these interesting topics, and I think other people would be interested in this also. You know, I'm a part of everything I see and do and hear and read, and places I've been to, and I like to share that with people. And one of the things that happened when I was teaching at Long Beach City College was I got involved in online teaching in the early days, and students used to say to me, and I tried to make that really interesting, of course, for them, even though it wasn't with Zoom or anything, it was just straight some homemade program that was invented at the college, and they'd write to me and say, one of them, I love, used the word dang. Dang, I wish I could have taken this in the classroom.
Dang.
So, yeah, comments like that. So while I could see the advantages for a lot of people of online classes, I like the classroom too.
Sure. Well, I think even though one can gain content knowledge through distance education that might even be on par with content knowledge delivered in the classroom, one does not get necessarily the passion and the nuance of certain fields of inquiry. And geography is associated with many nuances, and we certainly have a lot of passion for our field.
Yeah.
You know?
I always try to make things informative, entertaining. I think that's the way I teach, but some of them, of course, are only there for the entertainment.
I think you're right. But you know, if we go back to some of your paper presentations, I mean, your background is eclectic, as are your presentations, going from neighborhoods in the Long Beach community to Australian topics to stellar geographers. And I think what's interesting is that you have shown others that kind of passion as well, where they're eager to explore these particular subjects, you know. And here you are in California now for a few decades, I guess now. I mean, you must have an affinity for California, which is a a wonderful place to explore our discipline. Can you briefly describe why there might be an affinity for the state of California?
Well, it's a longer story than that. It's not only California. When we came here in the very first summer that we were here in California, we got into our car with our two boys and we drove all the way up to Canada to visit a friend, and we made sure we went to every national park, or sometimes there were national forests. We put up our tent and we took about 3 weeks to drive up there because we were seeing the whole country, and that's what I love about Australia too, that you can get out of the city and see grand vistas and fabulous landscapes, and we saw everything on the way up, and then on the way back we had to hurry back because we'd been so slow going up.
Is that right? You know, I mean, it's a beautiful state park. Palm Canyon is a nice little oasis in the desert with these palm trees. It's lovely, and I can just imagine how nice it would be to celebrate your birthday in Anza Borrego.
When I was teaching, when I began at Long Beach City College, of course they give you all the classes no one else wants, and I had to teach physical geography on a Saturday morning. And so I proposed to the class that if they wanted, I gave them alternative, but if they wanted, we could all go camping out at Anza Borrego, and I'd take them on the hike up to the Palm Oasis, and some came late and I had to do the hike twice. But it didn't matter. And so I did that for a few years.
Really?
Saturday morning class, and I remember one of the ladies, she was a Hispanic lady, and she said to me, you know, my kids used to think I was just a mom, but now when we go for a drive I talk about the clouds and the landscape. She said, they think I'm a brain.
Well,
it's very important you get for teaching, I think, when people tell you it's changed their lives.
well, and a great reward it is, really, because you spend this time in the classroom and students are oftentimes silent, but for this one to confide to you that her children think she's a brain goes a long way. It goes a long way. You've made an impact on this person's life, and I'm sure you've made an impact on many students' lives. And you've also influenced your colleagues in a lot of ways, and in California geography in particular. And as we begin to conclude this session, I'll ask you to, reflect upon your experiences in California and Australia too, and perhaps offer some words of advice for individuals who might be undergraduates or graduate students seeking to get a career in geography, and also maybe some words of advice for colleagues who are in geography. Any thoughts you'd like to share?
Oh, now that's hard, I always say to my students, be curious, and I find it's hard nowadays because they all want to have jobs so they can buy a car, and they have limited time they just want to get this piece of paper that says they've got their degree, and not all of them, there's some who are really still heavily invested. And I think about ones, my former students, they now work in town planning or teach in other colleges, a couple of them, and I think that's really nice. And I have always in the classroom said, talk to me if you think you'd be interested in a career in geography, things like that. I think I'm still on the committee too for geography, and that's another subject. As for colleagues, I'm not very good at giving advice to to adults. I think, I think they like to lead their own lives, and what does bother me is the dependence on screens full of silly games and pastimes and following music, which can be enjoyable, but it seems to me if all that had been available when I was young, I wouldn't have had the wonderful experiences that I've enjoyed throughout my life. So abandon the screens is one of the things I wish that more of our young people would do.
I can see that in terms of the seemingly lack of interest or increasing lack of interest in reading, whereas reading fosters such analytical skills, creativity, and wonder about the world, you know?
Curious.
Be curious. Those are your final words. Absolutely.
Well, let me reflect. There's that Tennyson poem, Ulysses. I can't really remember it, but I think I am a part of all that I have seen, cities, men, and so on. I can't quite remember the words of it, but I think that sums up the way I feel about my life in geography.
Well, I can well imagine, and you've had a good life in geography, and you're a shining example for so many others, Ray. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you agreeing to this interview and spending time with us. This concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.